I'm thrilled to be here with this group of people because music is also a passion of mine. So starting here with Blake, why don't you introduce yourselves, tell us, and these people, why you are on this panel? Why did they stick you on the music panel? What do you do, and for how long have you done it?
I'm Blake Neely. I'm a TV and film composer. I've been doing it since 2002 when I met this guy to my right, Greg Berlanti. I've done over 20 series and many more pilots and some film work. And I'm a UT grad. So all that together is why I'm here.
Nice. And I think, whether they know it or not, people here are familiar with your work. Do you want to reel off some of the things that you have scored?
I started with Everwood.
Mm-hmm.
I've scored Brothers and Sisters on ABC. I currently am scoring The Mentalist on CBS, Arrow on the CW. Right now what's on the air is The 60s on CNN, and we're about to kill ourselves with The Flash on CW.
Yeah. Greg.
I'm definitely the person on this panel with the least music experience. I have lots of musical experience, but it's a different genre. Anyway.
That's how we're ending this night.
I'm here because Blake is one of my best friends and probably my most frequent collaborator in the business. So when he asks me to do anything, I say yes. And then I turn around and ask him to do anything, and he says yes. That's our deal. And so he asked me to do this and to help out. So I can.
And people know your name. You should probably tell them.
No. I've done.
I've created and executive produced
and been an executive producer on a bunch of different TV shows through the years, and directed some films and produced some movies, and so I've had the good fortune I've done I think we've done over 10 series now together.
Yeah, more than that.
Yeah.
Plus a movie.
So my favorite thing I have my favorite thing I have in my office next to my desk is a poster that Blake gave me of all the projects we've worked on the last decade together. And
yeah,
so,
I wrote the theme for each of the ones.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. Nice. Jason.
My name is Jason Harkins. I have no idea why I'm here right now. I'm a music supervisor for The Good Wife. I came at this in a very sort of roundabout way. I worked in post-production in Los Angeles for a long time. And I decided to move to Austin a year ago. And when I left the show as a producer on The Good Wife, they said, why don't you continue to do the music? I was doing it unofficially, sort of doing the creative lifting all along. And they said, well, we'll just sort of switch your title to music supervisor and you can move to Austin. So now I'm music supervising officially here in Austin. And that's what
can you explain to people what a music supervisor does?
Absolutely. Music supervising, it's sort of split down the middle, at least on our show. We have the score that the composer handles, and everything else from recognizable artists that you hear to characters quoting lyrics to just background stuff that you hear in a bar, all falls into my domain. So I'm there to both find those songs creatively and then aid in the process of clearing those songs and getting everyone paid in order to put them on the air legally.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think we're done here. Tom.
All right.
Hi, I'm Tom Vale. I have a music licensing company that's actually based here in Austin called Frog Music Licensing. And so what that means is basically I work closely with a lot of musicians who are almost all Austin-based, and I collect their music and send their music to people like Jason, and then sort of just pray that Jason picks one of the songs that I've sent him and places it in a TV show that he's music supervising, and then we get paid. So yeah.
And Jason told me in the green room, Tom is who you talk to for any legal questions.
Yeah.
But if you have music that you want to get on the air, we give it to you.
Yes. It's a roundabout thing. The way I work is that I'm spoiled. A lot of music supervisors out there have to go through the pains of actually clearing the music for the show. which is a really complicated labyrinth of working with publishers and people that own masters and finding who those people are and researching it and getting them paid. CBS works a little differently in that they have people that sort of aid you and help you in that process. So I work with a woman named Robin Bueller. She is indispensable to me, and I have the pleasure of basically working with Robert King to find creatively what works for our scenes.
Let me interrupt for 1 sec, and this is real inside baseball, but is she a CBS studio or CBS network person?
CBS Studios. Okay. So she works, we're on the phone constantly, 4 and 5 times a day, talking about what I want cleared, how do we clear it, what's it going to cost, and working on the puzzle of how to make that work with our budget. And she does the heavy lifting on actual clearing and doing the paperwork.
What kind of a budget realistically are we looking at for music?
For The Good Wife?
Sure.
For The Good Wife, we're looking at $50,000 per episode.
Per episode. And what does that buy you?
Not much. Clearance for music can be incredibly expensive. Anything on a major label is going to cost you traditionally $20,000 aside. So, for instance, if you want to put Beck in your episode like we did at the end of either last year or the year before, it all blurs together for me, but whatever episode that was, you clear that one song and you've pretty much used up a big portion of your budget for the episode. So it's all about looking at every scene individually and saying, is this a song that is featured in the scene, and is it worth spending something for a major label? In 2014, I feel like the world of independent music is so rich that you rarely need to go to those major labels to spend that sort of money. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it works. But creatively,
Tom
you
has
really
nowhere to
don't
live, you understand.
Exactly.
He's out of house and home.
Yeah. So, I love working with
totally
guys like
agree.
Tom because they, you don't hear it on the radio, but it's out there, and it works well for the scenes, and it brings something to the scenes. And, specifically on The Good Wife, I think that we're all about that. We don't like to we're not out there to promote an artist, we're out there to make the scene better. So many times we do that through independent artists.
And then you accidentally promote that artist.
Sure.
Which is a good thing.
Sure.
And I want to step back. That's sort of the middle end of the process, and I want to step back to the creation of the piece of writing first. So, Greg, if you are working on a script, or even if your staff is working on a script, and there's a particular musical cue that comes to mind, not necessarily a piece of score because you have the best guy to do that, but a song that exists. How do you go about working that in? Do you say, maybe we can get it? Do you put it in the script? Just talk us through that process a little bit.
I'd say it's a whole mixture of those things. I think sometimes there's a song that you really like that I actually write to music. So you'll write to it sometimes, and then you'll see the scene shot and edited, and you'll put the song over it, and it will be horrible. And you're like, wait a second, but I wrote this scene to that song.
Can you remember a time you have done that?
Oh my gosh. I honestly, it happens a lot, more often than not. And it's to the point now where I say the one song that's not going to work on this scene is the song that I wrote the scene to. And actually one thing that Blake and I do, because we sort of have a fun competition where it's like if I put a song in, there's kind of a fun thing everybody knows. Blake wants to beat it with a piece of score because A, it's cheaper, and B, usually, most of the time, it's better and it gives the show its own, we really have our own personality. But one thing we've started doing now is he reads the pilot scripts and writes a lengthy piece of sort of music based on his emotional response to the pilot script. And I'll write episodes, the first episodes a lot of times of the show, to that piece of music.
This is the second time I've heard that this weekend. Noah Hawley said the same thing, as he has his scorer do it and then writes from there.
It's
really cool.
Yeah, it sort of evolved naturally.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so and that's kind of always my preference. It's been fun to be a part of shows that have helped discover artists though too. We did a bit of it on Everwood. I mean, all the way back to Dawson's Creek. You're doing it all the time, and you would try and find younger artists that would then cover some song that you loved, because then you
Always
could-
cheaper.
yeah, always cheaper. And then, but then some of those artists would really turn into things, and then you go back to do the album for the show. I still call it an album. Then you go back to do the album for the show, and then they're too expensive. So that's always fun.
I bought 4 pieces of vinyl just last week.
Okay, good.
You can call it an album.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we've got the script. Sometimes you want to beat the suggested music. When you are given a script, Blake, what happens next? How do you start to go through it? How do you start to find where music fits
Well,
in
I
for
don't
you?
on a go forward basis. I don't read scripts because I'll read the script for the pilot because we have what Greg and I like to do is try to make a sound world that is specific to that project that maybe sounds like nothing else on TV. I don't know. I probably rip people off all the time, but it's specific to our show. And he'll let me work early on it. He'll let me read a version of the script that will never be shot, but it's got the emotionality. And the reason I like to write this long piece before is because once you start working to picture, because some people don't think, I mean, even my mom doesn't think that I write to picture. She's like, oh, you must have had a nice piece laying around that Greg used. No, I write specifically to the scene and follow the scene. Thanks, Mom. I also don't sing at the end. That's not me. That's Ben Foster. But anyway, what it does for me is it allows me to write away from picture because picture always dictates how you write, where you have a key change, where you have a meter, how fast. So it's a way of me saying to Greg, what do you think about this 10 minutes? Is there anything in there that like feels like the show? So that's a starting point. And then week to week, I don't read the scripts because my style of scoring is to score it how the audience would see it. So I don't want to watch it for the first time and know like, oh, that person's going to die and that person's going to be the illegitimate son. I like to find out as the audience finds out and react and score it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. There has to be, I would imagine, and I'll kind of open this up, to other people's processes. Maybe you guys know, a give and take between the editors and the composers on shows. I don't know if you're given a locked picture every time, or does a composer sometimes have the
There's
option?
no such thing as a locked picture in 2014.
Until it's on the air.
Until it's on the air.
That is true. But I wonder about that. Like, can the composer say, can we change an edit? Does he have that kind of say in the process?
No. No.
Colluding
No,
with
it's
the
your job.
director?
It's your job to figure out how to make your music fit to their edit. And when you have good editors on a show, they sort of cut to a rhythm that they aren't aware of. And you find their rhythm, and then you score the show. But yeah, I wouldn't dream of saying to him, look, I know you love that scene, but if you just gave me 12 more frames. I mean, he loves the scene without those 12 frames. So that's, you've spent at that point weeks on that one episode.
Yeah, but all I'll say is there's been plenty of times I've been at his house watching the thing, and he'll say, well, if you will indicate
If you
like
gave me just a little more time.
I could do this, and then so because throughout the process, and it's why there's never a locked picture. Throughout the process, people are giving you great thoughts. I think that makes something you're kind of always participating and watching it get better.
I want to get real specific for 1 second. You talked about finding the voice of the show that is different from other shows that you guys have worked on. Let's talk about The Flash for a second. I mean, you were probably given the pilot script, if that's how you guys work, and then you're starting to develop a sound for that show. How did you differentiate it from Arrow? How did you differentiate it from anything else you had worked on?
We had an interesting way of getting into it because we introduced Barry Allen, who becomes the Flash, in an episode of Arrow. And that was actually where I was the most terrified because I was in the middle of working on Arrow, which has a specific sound. I knew we were introducing this character for another show. I didn't have a script of where that show was going. And so that was sort of, and I knew I had to announce it in that scene with that character. And we talked a lot about, like, what is this character going to be like? And Greg said, because we usually talk in very quick shorthand because that's what you do after 12 years together, right? And he said, well, think of it this way. If Arrow was Batman, Flash would be like Spider-Man. And that was it. I was like, got it. And he said, oh, and also mad scientist. I went, okay, got it. And that sort of, we develop shorthands and
Sure.
You just talk emotion. And one of the things that's always helpful. Greg said I'm the only one on this panel that doesn't know music, and that's what's great about Greg, because he talks to me in dramatic arcs, which is what I need. I'm more like an actor. Like, tell me what you want me to do with the scene. Don't tell me to use a flute in C minor at 120 BPM. That scares the hell out of me. It's like, well, why don't you do it? But Greg doesn't talk musical. We talk emotions, character, story, family, that kind of thing.
And I want to kind of zero in even more if we can. Once you have this conversation about emotions, and you must do this as well in putting songs to the show, how do you translate that to music? How does that translate orally to you? Yeah, this is deep into the creative process.
That's hard. That's
I know.
Question.
I'm very good at this.
You want to take that one first?
I'm kind of an idiot about it, actually. Like a lot of the times, like I get a scene. I know that we need a song for the scene. I don't know what sometimes I know. Sometimes I'm like, I know what song is going to do this, and it's a one-shot thing. I present it to Robert King. He says, that's it, and we're done. Other times, I'm like, I don't fucking know. So what I do is a lot of the times I just throw things at picture. I just literally put up some songs and say, that's interesting. I didn't know it was going to do that. And it's sort of like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what works. And it's a gut. At some point, it becomes just a gut instinct of like, this is it. This is the one that works. And I always like to, from a music supervisor perspective, like I'm not the end all be all creative part of this process. I'm there to facilitate to the creatives. Here's what I think works. So I usually send 3 songs, and I say, here are 3 songs. This one does this one does this, and this one does this. And they all do something a little differently. And sometimes one of those 3 is right, and sometimes we do a second round. So
can you give us an example of, 3 songs that you've sent in specific scenes and how they came to decide how you describe them?
Well, I don't know if I could give you a specific time where I can give you all 3 songs, but what I could do is, like, at the beginning of this season, this past season, we went through this whole thing. At the end of last year, I've already mentioned this thing that we did with Beck, where we used this song. It was called Black Tambourine, and we used it throughout the episode. It was peppered throughout the episode, and it was all about this sort of like boom, 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 boom drum thing that sort of like propelled the entire episode forward. And we all loved what it did. It was like one of those things was like, wow, this really worked well for us. Mm-hmm. And when we got back for this season, we were all on the like, we need to do more of that. So first episode out of the gate, there was, we had the same sort of like, some of the episodes we do with The Good Wife, there's what I call like a ticking clock. And it's like, we have to get this stuff solved within a certain amount of time on the show. So we tried to do it with a number of songs, and we tried this thing with like a classical piece, and then we tried like a Jen Wigmore song that was like kind of working but not quite. And Robert called me, and we were all pulling our hair out saying, this is exasperating. It's not quite working. And then it was like, wait a minute, what if David Buckley did this? And what if this became a score thing? And it sort of broke open a whole new thing for the show of like, it became the voice of the entire season for David Buckley. And it was like this classical moment of like him going into this like very like frenetic classical score, and it worked great. Mm-hmm. So that's the sort of thing that we do where it's like, it takes experimenting and cutting all that stuff to picture in order to say it's almost there, but it's not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Tom, starting with you, and I'm curious, especially from you guys, Tom and Jason, do you listen to music for pleasure anymore?
Yeah, I definitely do still listen to music for pleasure, but for the most part, I don't listen to stuff within my own catalog for pleasure anymore because I've just heard it enough. When an artist comes out with a new album, I'm always excited, and I check it out, and I get to know it really well, and then I kind of put it away until it's time to send it in for something. But yeah, I do get burned out on the stuff that I actually rep. Sure. Yeah. But yeah, I listen to all kinds of new stuff all the time. Sure. It's like food.
Yeah, and I think so many of us feel that way. So I'm kind of curious to hear from all of you. Again, Tom, starting with you, how do you discover new music?
Well, most of the artists I'm working with are here, so KUTX is a big deal for me. I'm always listening pretty much, anytime I'm in the car, I'm listening to KUTX. I get recommendations from other artists. I also, more than I go out and see music, I look and see who's playing, and then I just go and find them online and listen to what they have. Sometimes I go out and listen to music, but I have 3 kids, so not very much anymore. No.
Jason, how do you find new music?
Couple of things. I read a lot of blogs, and I do that. I think Tumblr is amazing for that. I think that creating a Tumblr account and then finding, I probably have 40 or 50 different blogs that I follow on Tumblr, and then literally every day I can get up in the morning and I can look at all the different things that they posted, and I find 4 or 5 things that are interesting, and then I use that as a launching pad, and then I go to Spotify, and I look up all these artists that I've written down, and I listen to their, I listen to 20 or 30 seconds of their song, each song on their latest album, and there's the obvious things like Pitchfork and Stereo Gum and some of these really big blogs that I look at daily and say okay, here's what's happening and here's what's coming out.
Are there great ones we don't know about? Like there was that proliferation of music blogs maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it was pretty easy to navigate, and you could find out who knew what they were talking about. But now they're just everywhere. Are there ones that we don't know about that we should be checking out?
I can't say that there's anything I could recommend that just comes to mind. Like I said, I think Tumblr is a really powerful tool to and the way I handle Tumblr, because I'm not really savvy with the whole Facebook world. I don't do well with social media. So I figured out how to make it work for me. And the way I made Tumblr work for me was that I know what bands I like. I would I would search for that band and then find out who was talking about that band on Tumblr. And then I would follow that person. Sure. So it was always sort of a reverse engineering of how do I make this work for me? So, I still think that I don't want to say that Pitchfork is my Bible, but I do, more than any other music blog out there, I feel like what they are reviewing and promoting is some of the most interesting music being made.
Yeah, I'll agree. Greg, how do you find new music?
Another thing we instituted a long time ago is we have the music supervisors of the various shows will drop off a mixed DVD once a week, and then I'll plug that in my car. So that's usually how I discover a song that I like. So
Is it just stuff that they think is cool and would fit on the show?
They're also reading the episodes, and so they're responding. So I try to create as many feedback loops as possible in the show, so that we're generating something. It's like a game of tennis, and then somebody else is hitting the ball back, and then it comes out in the form of then you'll have, and all the writers on staff will get that mixed DVD as well, and then so there's a constant kind of music conversation happening. That our music supervisor sort of begins and gets going.
Cool, that's really fun. How do you find new music, Blake?
Well, let me just stop and say, do you notice that none of them spent $1 in finding new music? None of them.
That's not true.
If he listens
not
for
true.
more than 30
You didn't
seconds.
say you spent $1.
I bought
Tumblr
4
to
vinyl albums
Spotify to
last week.
Pitchfork. This is how we make our living, by people buying our music.
And Blake will be selling CDs outside.
Nobody will buy them. My kids, actually, I have teenagers now, so my kids tell me what they're listening to, what to listen to. They show me a lot. Whenever I start on a show, the music supervisor and I will talk about, because I hate watching a show or a movie that the score feels just like it has nothing to do with the songs. And this is something I learned early on with Greg, is when we started Everwood, he said he was going to do, most of the songs were going to be 70s songs or 70s covers. And he even honed in on the instrumentation, so I could design a palette for the show that fit with those types of songs. So I'll work with the music supervisor, like on Arrow, it's, and I'll listen to some of those songs and take elements that go into the score that sort of make it
that complement at least.
Yeah, more of a patchwork quilt instead of just random samples sitting around.
Is there anything you guys, any music you guys have gotten into lately that you can recommend to us?
Owen Pallett. I love him.
I'll never be able to put him on any show, but he's amazing.
Anyone?
Well, I mean, I'm torn between,
Plugging your
yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
Give us one
I
of
want to
each.
plug everybody who I work with, but
A couple of each.
yeah, I mean,
Listen, we got another half hour here, so whatever you want. 20 minutes.
well, I mean, there's people who I don't work with. I don't know. I like telekinesis a lot.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, people who I do work with, Sarah Jaffe is doing amazing stuff. There's a band here called Wire Tree, who I think are one of the more underrated bands in Austin. Yeah.
Okay,
I don't know.
acceptable
Yeah.
answers. Thank you. Greg, what are you listening to? Anything we should be listening to?
Well, I'll listen to like Satellite Top 20, and then I'll feel like I discovered the person. So I'm just telling people about Sam Smith like they've never heard about him before. Things like that.
I'm curious, I mean, you have a couple of shows on the CW now. Is there pressure from the network to be like, get young artists and this top 20 stuff?
Not really. I mean, it's always so interesting to me which shows end up being more score driven and which shows end up having that element, having opportunities. Because there's two ways I think of how we'll use the music, which I think you guys can speak to a little bit more. But we'll use it sometimes as what we call scores, which is a song that's also acting as score. And that became really big in the 90s over visual montages for the characters. When a character had died, and you have that song played over it. Another interesting element about that is, when we would go to syndicate the shows, we lost all the rights to a lot of those for both Dawson's and for Everwood. We had to go back and replace 70% of the songs. So those episodes, in a way, are like lost to posterity. Or really lost to history if you don't have them on a VHS, because what you see on your DVD or what you see on Netflix or whatever is not the song that played on the original airing of the episode. So it's always interesting to me what becomes what. Arrow is it's pretty much all score, and so it's a huge source of savings. That 50,000 is something we end up using on some other element of the show. But we didn't know that in the beginning. We kept trying to drop songs over it, and we really pulled that back.
I think that having it be mostly score is what gives it that very cinematic feel,
Absolutely.
too. And
Absolutely.
the score speaks to that. Is there anything you've discovered through your kids or otherwise that you're into these days?
Well, my lawyer would say don't mention anyone you're listening to because you don't want to be sued for possible plagiarism. Because some artists will say, yeah, you were talking ATX, so you listened to me, huh? I thought that sounded familiar. But I try to listen to all types because the shows that we're doing now, there's I introduced a dubstep element in the score to Arrow that came through listening to a lot of dubstep. So Flash, I have to start listening pretty soon for how we're going to trick that out. Yeah, what was I going to say about? I don't know. I was going to say something about. You were saying something about savings and cinematic. One of the things that we have always tried to do is make the shows more cinematic, because when I started, there was this idea that TV was a lesser art form and a lesser media, and you didn't have to sound as good, and that's all gone away. I mean, we have much bigger stories sometimes than in film. I have friends that only work in film. They're like, oh, but you're just a TV guy. And I had a $300 million opening this weekend. I'm like, oh, yeah? Well, 18 million people watched our show, so that's like a $360 million opening if they'd all bought tickets.
And it's for 5 years.
And they're going to come back next week. You're going to have a 70% drop-off.
Your friends are very competitive.
Yeah, well, he's a big guy. So I just think it's up to all of us on this panel to make sure that it is up to the level of cinematic quality, because that's what the audiences are watching.
No pressure. This is actually sort of a genre question, a trope question that goes along with that. But as we move to the more cinematic feeling television shows, which I think we clearly are we going to lose theme songs? Remember theme songs, you guys? They were fun.
I think we started that process a while back, and I think Lost started that with the title card
Yeah.
and the 7-second thing or the 5-second thing, and then they became stings. And The Good Wife has actually had a very interesting evolution in the last probably year and a half, dealing with that. And it all started in a very accidental way of like being on the mixed stage and like, wow, how do we get out of this piece of score into the main title? And sometimes it was just like this like speed bump of like, it's just not working. And how do we make that work? And then, well, what if we didn't do the main title at all? And what if it was just the sound of an elevator for 7 seconds over the main title card? And given the right drama of the preceding scene, that actually became a very powerful thing. And that sort of opened us up to, well, why can't we do a source piece there and play Sharon King and the Dap, Sharon and the Dap Kings or whatever it is, like. So now we sort of approach it as, yes, we do have a theme song. Yes, it is a brand for the show, but we don't have to do it every week. And sometimes it's source, and sometimes it's a soundscape, and sometimes it's the theme song.
But also, I don't think, and this is someone who's written theme songs, I don't think we need them anymore because of how we're watching TV. I mean, if you watch, I love what Jeff Beal wrote for House of Cards, but all of us binge watch House of Cards. So every time one ends, you have to watch it again, and we're just fast forwarding. So, it'd be nice maybe the very first episode, you have one, or the first thing of the season. But I think, like, give it to story. Let them, it's 45 seconds or a minute, you can put the story.
But don't you find it interesting that, like, we've got this, like, I feel like we're, like, picking a side. And it's like, there's the Lost camp of, like, we don't need anything, 5 seconds and we need more story time. And then there's, like, Orange is the New Black, which is, like, I don't know, 2 minutes?
Yeah.
It's
And
like
I will watch
crazy.
it every
It's so
time,
long.
too. Because
And
it's
you
a
watch it
great
every
song.
time?
I watch it every time.
You watch
it's
it every
a great
time.
song. There's fun
So,
visuals on
I think we're living in a world where anything goes.
Yeah.
And
It's very
I think that there are
fungible.
people that will fast forward, and there are people who are like, I need to get in the mindset of this show. And the mindset of this show is 2 minutes of close-ups of
I'm in.
eyes and
I am in.
mouths set to music.
I'm staying in Austin until I meet Crazy Eyes. I don't care.
We do 7 seconds.
I think it's very much a network versus cable though thing, especially pay cable. They do have the time. I mean, their episodes are still the same length as they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And our episodes are, when I started on Dawson's, we were doing 44, 45-minute episodes, and now they're 42 minutes. So,
That's
that's
had a long theme song on that too.
they really did. And they changed it, I think, from the first to I Don't Want to Wait. Wasn't the initial
that's
one.
right.
Yeah.
Funny. But man, that Game of Thrones theme is super long.
Yeah.
Ugh, fast forward that every time. It's a great song, but come on.
There's a little. I mean, for me, there's like. I mean, this is just me as a viewer. There's sort of a Pavlov thing with like when we got into Battlestar Galactica, and
Put you in the mood.
yeah, I would want to hear that, and then like be like ready to go, So.
It is show by show, though. I mean, what you're saying is interesting, even episode by episode. But like, for the '60s on CNN, they gave me this 1-minute main title sequence, and I think they wanted it because you sort of reel in viewers but on Arrow we have a 7-second card that you can't pass because it's so close and it's always tied up with the cue that comes before that you have to watch that sting.
I mean, honestly, as someone who's, when you create shows or whatever, one of my favorite moments of my life was when Blake played for me the first time the Everwood theme song, and I can remember where I was sitting and I heard it and it was just perfect and it started with that violin and it kind of, we didn't even know yet that we'd be drifting over the mountains or doing all this kind of things that we did, but it was those kind of, I mean, I miss them as a viewer. From network shows, I wish that that they still existed, but it's getting tougher and tougher.
I wonder if it's generational too. I mean, the thing you just did the theme song for is about the '60s, which is the heyday of theme songs. Whereas compared to Arrow, this is a generation that wants the story fast, wants to get through real fast.
I grew up where there were always theme songs. I mean, it was when you went and got your bowl of ice cream and got ready, and Mom's going, "It's on, hurry!" And you're listening to it, and it's beckoning you. I loved it, but I don't think we're living in that time anymore where people care.
Well, I think that Tom nailed it when he said it's Pavlovian. It's like for people my age and older, and maybe even a little younger. I don't know. I'm not going to say how old I am. I'm of the same. I'm cut from the same cloth. That it feels like if I'm going to dedicate an hour of my life to this show, I need to hear the theme song in order to set myself there.
Absolutely.
So I actually appreciate a good theme song and a good main title.
Then we all agree. Theme songs are dead. Are there any questions from the audience? Are we recording this, by the way? You are? All right. Then here's what we're going to do. You will stand up and ask your question. I will repeat the question for the recording, and then these guys will answer the question. Is that cool? Who did Thicky Trick, and how did that come about?
For those of you who don't know, let me back up a little bit. So that episode was based on a real-life thing with, there was this dust-up between a singer-songwriter named Jonathan Coulter and Colton? I'm sorry, Colton. And Glee. So what happened was that there's a song called Baby Got Back from a rap song from the 90s by Sir Mix-a-Lot. And Jonathan Colton did a folk version of that was sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing that was sort of this internet sensation with his fans. And then later on, Glee decided to do a cover of that version of the song and sort of ripped off his melody. So it became this sort of like legal thing between Jonathan Colton and Glee as to whether or not Jonathan Colton had any sort of right to what he had done. We did an episode based on that whole thing. So Thicky Trick was our version of Baby Got Back. When I got the script, after I pooped my pants of like, how are we going to do this? We started looking around, and we had a lot of conversations, and it started with, Method Man was on the show a few years ago. Maybe we bring back Method Man and do a thing with him. And I went into Method Man's catalog, and like there's a certain type of rap that you need in order to make the whole Baby Got Back turned into a folk song, turned into a pop song work. And that was not Method Man. So after we got over that hump, then it was like, well, do we actually write a rap song and then turn it into a folk song and then turn it into a pop song? Or do we find a rap song and then turn it into a pop song and turn it into a folk song? And we had a writer on the show who actually, I'm not sure where she found the song, but it was from a music library, and it was a guy named DJ Troy, and it was all licensed through Getty, which is normally stock footage. But they own the rights to it, so we ended up licensing the rap version of this song for next to nothing. And then there's a guy named Tom Polche who is indispensable to me that works directly for CBS, and he wears a lot of hats, and he can sort of he's a songwriter and a producer and can do a lot of different things. So I called Tom and I said, Tom, I need for you to take a rap song and turn it into a folk song and turn it into a pop song. And I sent it to him, and he called me back. He's like, dude, I got this, man. And he did. I mean, it was like he knocked it right out of the park. And we were all so excited about it because it's like, you read a script like that and you're like, well, we got to have this song that both, that the audience can buy as a folk song and buy as a pop song that would be, that would sound real. And he did all of that for us, and I can't thank him enough. Thank you, Tom Polche. If you ever see this, thank you. So that's all how it came about and what happened with Thicky Trick.
What season was that?
That was this season.
Okay.
That was like,
Sorry, I'm not caught up.
5/11,
There's
I think.
a lot of TV on. Get it when
There is a lot of TV.
Yeah, relax. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, it was. The question was about music rights issues these days versus the olden times. When I was starting,
ADC,
and I
they
was the
call
same.
it.
It depends on song to song. Sometimes you can, what part of what created that at the WB at the time, and still really today, still too. And again, I think you can probably speak to it better than I can, because by by the time it reaches me, I just get told, no, you can't have that. And so, but a lot of times I'll be told you can have it, but we can't have it in. Sometimes you'd be told you can't have it in perpetuity, and you just didn't care what perpetuity meant. You care about the episode airing that week, and you fall in love. The editor has placed you and the editor have placed some song in the cut. And we've watched the cut and then forget about it. It's like, that's how we experienced it. And we're trying to be the arbiters of that emotional experience and make sure that the audience has the exact experience we have and nothing can sort of beat it. And so you fight and fight and fight for that song, but you can afford, just a few times use. Obviously, I think everyone would prefer, and that lends to the other sort of 30 or 40% or whatever the songs were that we didn't have to replace. A little coda to the story. It was so painful for me to go through and replace all these songs. I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's just, I feel like I'm like literally going back in and ripping these things out, and then you're sitting there and reliving the whole experience. There's actually companies now, or at least there were at the time, that went through and would do sound-alikes and find songs that were sound-alikes, and then they would present the episodes back to you. And so, if that answers your question.
One more, maybe we have time for one more question? Yeah. The question's about the role of the soundtrack in any episode or in the series as a whole.
Well, I definitely try to make the music a thing for each show I work on. There's two ways that you can approach composed score music. One is it's a part of the sound department, and one it's a part of the writer department. And Greg has always said, you're my, seventh writer on the show? Because there's always, when you finish a scene and you act the scene, cut the scene, there's always going to be something missing still in the story, and that's where I come in. And then on top of the writing process, I try to give each score a different sound, a different feel, so that it does become more, I hate to use the word iconic, but that it just becomes part of the fabric of the show. Yeah. So I try very hard to make it a thing.
I think that Greg will probably disagree with this, but I think that at some point, like from my perspective, shows sort of early on in the process, like during the pilot process or early in the first season, shows sort of take on a life of their own and sort of tell you whether or not music should play a character in the show. And you have to kind of, like, you can't be precious about it. You have to get out of the way of the actual storytelling, I think, a lot of the times. And, whether, you can try to shoehorn something into the show and be, Grey's Anatomy and break new music, but not every show and every story will allow that. So I think that you have to sort of take a step back from whatever it is that you're working on and saying, is this what is the creative heartbeat of the show or not? And every show is different.
Yeah. And I think that kind of speaks to the macro of a television show. I mean, that's going to happen at every step in the process. A writer will write the pilot, but once you bring in your staff, or once you cast that thing, it becomes a different thing. And it does, in many ways, tell you what this show is going to be at every step. And I think to think of the music as no differently makes a lot of sense. I think let's wrap it up. I have one more question for you guys, and that is, what are you watching on television these days? What are you getting excited about? What are you talking about with your coworkers, rooms, spouses, etc.?
Do you really want to know?
I really want to know.
I'm going to disappoint everyone right now.
I want to start with Tom.
We've been watching Derek, the Ricky Gervais, the new Ricky Gervais show, which I like a lot. It's really, well, clearly there's some fans. And Sherlock I'm catching up on right now. And that's about it. You generally fall asleep.
We have 3 kids.
Yeah.
Jason.
I'm watching Game of Thrones Season 2. It's amazing. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
I'm sorry, Gang of Thrones?
Gang of Thrones, right? That's it, right?
Not familiar.
I fell in love with Silicon Valley this year.
For sure.
I just thought it was Aviato. For those who watch it. No, I just think it was to them to do that in 8 episodes, to sort of create something that was both funny and dramatic and smart, and to get that much story in was really incredibly impressive to me. So I kind of fell in love with that show.
I don't have time to watch a lot of TV, but I did start watching, because I'm on a little bit of a break, I did start watching Penny Dreadful, which,
It's fun.
yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
All right, all correct answers. Please give a round of applause to all of our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who came out today.